Do you or somebody that you know keep dating idiots? You keep going through the same cycle over and over again, and it seems like you're dating the same person, but in different clothing. If that's you, then stick around because my guest today, Laura Forbes, may have the answers for you. I'm your host, Daniel James, and as always, if you're new here, welcome. Laura Forbes was last on the podcast 4 years ago, and she's a dating and relationship coach who specialises in helping women navigate the often confusing and frustrating world of modern dating. She's got over a decade of experience with behavioural change and neuro-linguistic programming, and Laura works with clients to identify the root cause of their relationship patterns and limiting beliefs. And these are things that are often staying hidden, but continue to impact our choices and experiences when it comes to love. In today's conversation, we explore how dating's evolved in the 4 years that we last spoke, including the impact of social media, the challenges of distinguishing chemistry from genuine connection, and practical strategies for developing emotional availability and healthy boundaries. This is not one to be missed. So I'd like to welcome to the Promenade Project, Laura Forbes. Laura, how are we?
Hello, thank you for inviting me back on. I'm great, thank you.
Honestly, we had such a good conversation last time. We've just been chatting for about 20 minutes before we've started this. And again, I feel like I've known you for ages, even though we haven't spoken for years, but it's like picked up exactly where we left off. And I kind of mentioned in the intro that if people want to hear our last conversation, it was audio only, but we went over a lot of things when it comes to dating, a lot of which is still relevant now. However, 4 years on, is there any sort of things you've noticed, like common themes that have emerged over the last 4 years that you're now kind of talking to clients about?
Yes. So I think over the last 4 years, there's been a lot more of people getting really attuned to themselves, right? So a lot of women that I work with have great self-awareness, and they might have been reading books on attachment style, and they might have been listening to podcasts, and they have the information, but then it's the application of it, right? So they're still running into problems and patterns and getting frustrated because they're like, how do I know all of this stuff, but I'm seemingly unable to break that pattern, right? So I think another theme that I've seen coming through is that just a little bit of disenchantment with the dating pool in general. I mean, I think it existed last time we spoke, but it just seems to kind of have, escalated quite a lot in terms of people choosing to just not participate, choosing to just stay celibate or just stay single, and just keep their energy to themselves.
I think it's interesting. We did touch on that a little bit, but and again, we spoke about this off air. And I know that your main demographic is women that you work with, but you put something out on your social media and you've had quite a lot of interaction with men and women about this. And we were talking about this whole kind of shift in dating culture where people kind of live in this echo chamber, where basically they'll like a video about how all men are toxic, or men will go about how all women are psychos. And then the algorithm will show them more videos of that. So they get stuck in this loop of the opposite sex is the devil, I'm going to stay single, I'm going to stay celibate, blah, 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 blah. Have you found that to be true? The fact that there's almost like these little pockets of society now where they're just like, I would rather just stay single because it's so dangerous going into this unknown of all this toxic masculinity or these crazy toxic women. Is that kind of something you've noticed as well?
Yeah, I think part of the problem with this is men and women both have their frustrations, their resentments, that we all carry certain things, right? Like from past experiences or past relationships. And so some of those, things exist already within us. And then if we're watching something that mirrors that back to us, and kind of, it's like confirmation bias, right? And it just kind of strengthens and snowballs from there. I was actually looking at a reel this morning as well, and it was a woman talking about, we see in the media, right, like the trials and the allegations and stuff in terms of, there was the recent one with Blake Lively, and I think was her name Justin Baldoni, right? And this woman, I forget her name, it's Lauren something, I think. She was talking about how a lot of the articles and videos and stuff that have been pushed out in support of Justin Baldoni were actually created through bot accounts and stuff like that. So it's like, how much of this that we're looking at is actually manufactured? People were jumping on and being like, oh, I don't think so. And but there's obviously like the stats and the information behind it when they can see like when accounts have been created. So that adds a whole new like murky layer into what we're seeing as well, right? It's a lot of it is people's personal experiences that they're voicing, especially on say like apps like TikTok. So it's like, first-hand experiences of what they're running into in the dating world. But I think there's other stuff as well that's getting pushed out and other narratives that also add into that mix.
That's a really interesting thing you sort of mentioned there, because social media, again, I'm not against social media. Again, building business on social media. But I feel like nowadays, previously what would happen is you would hear your friend's experience of dating that jerk, that horrible guy. So you'd know the local idiot, basically, to like, right, stay away from him. Whereas nowadays, you're getting people's opinions from all over the world about all different kinds of people. And what you're seeing is the outliers. Now, again, these outliers are bad. Don't get me wrong. Like some of the stuff we've heard, again, it can be really, really bad. But then what's happening now is like it's completely warping people's perception of the opposite sex. And as we sort of mentioned, I feel like there's a lot of stuff nowadays where people are a lot more self-aware, and they've realised, kind of stuff we spoke about last time, that you need to work on yourself first, be that version of you that you want to date, and then you can go out and attract the kind of person. But nowadays, people are kind of like, well, my life's great. Like, my routine's absolutely awesome. I've got my dog. I've got my good routine. Life's amazing. I don't want to disrupt my peace for anybody. So do you almost think that it's kind of like just caused this massive wedge now where you're seeing people have almost given up on dating? And what's the potential dangers of that? Because we're social beings, aren't we, essentially?
Yeah. No, it's a massive topic. And again, I can really speak to like the segment that I work with. So like we spoke off air, women aged, late 20s to early 50s. And that's kind of like the feedback that I'm getting, right? So I know there's a whole section of people that I'm not necessarily speaking to and hearing their experiences. But yeah, definitely, people are more aware of their energy and the toll things take on them, right? So they're less likely to want to put themselves out there. And again, there's a couple of different segments here, right? So we've got people that have already been married and had kids. And so they're just like, yeah, just count me out, right? I'm good. I've done those things and I'm just happy on my own. Then we've got people that are actively wanting to meet a partner and start a family. And they're the ones that kind of like still having to go back into that arena and try and meet someone in this current landscape, even if they might think, I'd rather not have to deal with this. But their circumstances, their desires, like they're things they want. So, and then there's the camp that, similar age, but decide they don't want those things. And again, are just, what's the point in putting yourself out there necessarily if there's no particular rush?
Mm-hmm. So with this, it's kind of like a new thing now when it comes to like the dating apps were a thing when we spoke last time. But I feel like with this, and you've mentioned all these people have got these different things, wants and needs. Have you found that people have almost become burnt out as well with the dating apps and kind of not knowing where to look? Because like I said, there's all different people that want different things. So you've got people that kind of just want, I don't know, friends with benefits kind of thing. But then that's also a complete minefield in and of itself, because you don't want to offend the person. You've got to be really upfront. You don't want people to think that, I don't know, you what's the word, a slag or what, all this sort of stuff. There's the whole narrative that goes around with that. You've then got people that again have got kids, but then they think that disqualifies them because who's going to want me with quote unquote all this baggage? And then you've got people that genuinely just want to have a connection relationship. They're not worried about anything. They're completely comfortable. So how do people navigate this? Because there's so many different wants, needs, desires. There's not that many dating apps. There's not that many dating apps that are great. People are fatigued with the dating apps. Yeah. So basically what I'm trying to say is, how on earth are people meant to navigate this crazy world of dating nowadays?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting actually, because a little while back, I, again, use social media myself because through business. So I do tend to, probably consume more than most people because I'm looking for, what are the topics that are trending? What's the conversations that are happening? And so I had a point where I was like consuming and getting pushed down those algorithm, rabbit holes of, men are useless and this, that, and the other. And, if you watch enough of it, you start to, it starts to,
I agree.
Especially if you're not getting exposed to, so I work from home, obviously got my own business. And so I'm not, exposed to as many males in my day-to-day life as I might have been in my like early 20s. So again, you've kind of really got to use your critical thinking skills to come back to like, hang on a minute, let me disengage from this manufactured algorithm that is literally just showing me more of what I'm already just watching, and go like, what's the flip side? Like, what are other people talking about? And I took a conversation to my Instagram stories because I was like, typically I help women who are looking for a partner still, like looking for a relationship. And I thought, is this still my audience? Like maybe, people are just not interested in relationships anymore and they want to learn more about, how to be happy and thriving single. But that still the majority at that time when I opened up that conversation were still wanting partnership and we're still wanting, families. So again, it just shows that contrast of just because we're seeing high volume of certain narratives, it is not the full picture necessarily. And in terms of, again, as we get older, right, like there's more people in the same camp. So just because someone's got, children, a lot of people in the dating pool have got children, right? Because that's how it's happening. We're going through relationships and then there's breakups and then people still want to date and meet, and it's a human desire at the end of the day, right? So there's always going to be that drive to connect. And so I think one of the key things is taking a step back and unhooking from the narratives and going, do I want this to be true, right? Do I want this to be my experience? And if not, just kind of turning down the volume and just being mindful of what you're consuming so that you don't start to these beliefs form, right? Because we know a lot about beliefs and how they work. And we've got to be mindful of like what we're putting in.
It becomes that self-fulfilling prophecy, doesn't it? It's like that. I think maybe we spoke about it before, but that reticular activating system. So always when I do talks, I talk about people play the yellow car game. But basically, if you're driving along and basically you've got to see a yellow car, and then basically what it does is all the information your brain's seeing, this reticular activating system, the brain's filter just narrows it all down and shows you more of the yellow car. And then it's looking at that a lot of people have set their reticular activating system to show me all men are horrible, show me all women are toxic, show me why I should stay single forever. And then, as you said, the more you search for that, the more you get it coming back, which is confirmation bias. And I think that something that also plays into this that we kind of spoke about off air that I kind of want to bring into this conversation is the whole gender dynamics, because that's also another spanner that's been thrown into the works. And I feel like it's really bizarre because it was only 4 years ago that we spoke. Yes, we're coming out of the pandemic, but I feel like so much has shifted in terms of dating dynamics, and there's just so much stuff going on here. So I just want to sort of throw that into the works as well, about what you're kind of finding with clients when it comes to like these sort of gender dynamics as well, and the role that's playing on people's dating experiences.
Yeah, well, you made me laugh off air because you used the expression wet lettuce. I think you had a conversation with someone, right, who referred to them as a wet lettuce. And it's funny because I had a client recently who was like, "Oh, this guy's such a wet lettuce. I call him the wet lettuce." Sent me like a little and everything. And so like we were talking, right? Like some people's experience is that so I'm going to talk from female perspective because a lot of the clients that I work with are straight women, right? So women looking for men, preferably masculine men for some of them, and when they show up in that, the potential date or the person or the partner even is not in that energy, it feels like to the woman like she has to step into the masculine energy to like the get things done energy, or like if you're walking down a street at night as a woman on your own, you naturally in that masculine energy, right? Because you're like, oh, am I safe? Like you've got to be on the lookout. So and in different situations we move in and out. It's like fluid, right? Like this polarity scale of feminine masculine energy, and so we're always moving up and down it. So again, in terms of energy being drained, so it's going to get drained if someone's not meeting your needs or you're incompatible, but it's also going to get drained if you're in a relationship with someone that pushes you into an energy that you're not comfortable with, right? Like say for example you want to be in your feminine energy, then you need a partner that is going to facilitate that in a way, right? In terms of be complementary. And again, it's not a one size fits all thing. It's dependent on each individual and like what they desire and what their preferences are. But having that awareness of what energy makes me feel good, like what energy makes me feel safe, what energy do I prefer to be in the majority of the time, and then leading with that. Because if you're constantly in an energy where you're having to overgive or be on guard, and again if you're dating someone that feels emotionally unsafe, again you're not going to be in your relaxed flowy energy.
Emotionally
So,
safe. That's a really interesting word you mentioned there, because that's something that I talk a lot about. And when I'm working with clients, again, male, female, whatever it is, one of the biggest things that they struggle with is feeling emotionally safe.
yeah.
And you used the word there about incompatibility, or people not being compatible. Do you think nowadays a lot of people are worried that maybe time is running out, or that the dating pool isn't what it used to be? So you kind of have to suck it up and almost settle for red flags, minor incompatibilities, and people drifting towards the familiar, which may be that not feeling emotionally safe. Is that also something that people are doing now, kind of like forcing themselves into these situations to kind of just settle?
If anything, I think it's the opposite, because I think they've learned, we're getting older, so we're more aware of what something costs us, right? So when you're running around like in your late teens and your early 20s, you think got all the time in the world, you'd be like, you just have this assumption that it's going to figure itself out, right? So if you want a family and you're running around dating idiots in your 20s, you're like, yeah, that's fine, so I've still got plenty of time, and I'm sure I'll be married and with a couple of kids by the time I'm 30. But then what happens is, from what I experienced and what a lot of people that I work with have experienced, is you start to get to your late 20s, and because we don't age in a way where our mind feels old unnecessarily, right? Our heads are all still like,
Yeah.
so like they get to the point where they're like, oh shit, like, okay, what am I going to do about this? And so no, because you don't have the time to play with, right? You're aware that time is not necessarily on your side. Like, it's a bit of a cliche, but I mean, if you want kids and you want certain things, like you have to start reprioritizing. And I say this to clients, I'm like, like you have done in the past, you can go on your little detours with the exciting chemistry people. Or if you want a family, like you're gonna have to start making different decisions, because, if you're spending 3 years over here hoping that this person's going to change, only to arrive at the end of that time and they haven't changed, and they're not going to change because they're not prepared, like they don't want to, then will you feel bad about that, right? Like, so do you want to take that chance, or do you want to draw your boundaries and get clear on what you want and move in alignment with that, right? And trust that what you want and is going to unfold if you follow your own path.
I think that boundary setting is such a critical thing, because I think a lot of people struggle with setting boundaries. Like, first of all, don't know what boundary is. So if you don't know what it is, you can't actually set it. And then second of all, when it comes to setting boundaries, it's quite difficult to defend that boundary. Yeah. And it's a term that one of my clients used the other day, and I've never heard it before, falling in lust. Mm-hmm. So I think, again, nowadays, because obviously at that time we were separated from people, and maybe people were stuck in relationships they didn't want to be in, so they kind of got that freedom. Again, we're a few years down the line now, so I feel like people are still desperately trying to find that connection, because again, we are human beings that have that. Do you find that a lot of people struggle to differentiate between chemistry and connection? And do you feel that people do tend to fall in lust with this kind of almost idyllic picture that people can present on dates? Because as we know, like, it's very easy to wear a mask for a couple of months. So if you agree with that statement, how do people then navigate that period of not falling in lust? How do you navigate that connection versus chemistry and waiting to see the person reveal them true selves?
Yeah, so it comes back to connection to self, right? So a lot of the work that I do is centered around coming back to your authentic self. And when we're talking about this like insane chemistry or some of these unhealthy dynamics that play out, often some of those dynamics at play are the attachment style stuff. So the anxious attachment and the avoidant attachment tend to have great chemistry, because they're almost.
We spoke about that last time, but can you go into a bit more detail about that? Just quickly, just summarize that for people that don't know what those two things mean.
The
attachment styles, yeah, just those two attachment styles. Because I know we touched on it in the last episode, but just you sort of mentioned it there, just in case people don't know what that is.
So attachment style is basically how we relate to people, right? So when we're growing up, either our parents or our caregivers, sometimes we might grow up in a secure environment where our needs are met, and we're comfortable and safe to express ourselves and express our needs, and we're taught healthy boundaries. So in that situation, we might grow up to have a secure attachment style. Now, then you get into your relationships and things might go awry from there. But other people grow up in environments that are not as secure, right? Where it's not as emotionally safe, even from a young age. So in those situations, one of three things are going to happen. You'll develop an anxious attachment style. So they tend to struggle with boundaries. They find themselves like the highly empathetic types that are super aware of every little change in, tone or dynamic, because they're constantly in survival of like, is the environment safe? How do I need to shape shift today to stay safe and to get my needs met with this like volatile caregiver? Or whatever other dynamics are going on. Maybe a caregiver's got depression, and so they're not as attuned to the child. Anything can feed into this. So we might end up with anxious attachment style. Avoidant attachment style is kind of like a flip side of that. So again, different dynamics will feed into this, but some common ones are if someone is growing up and feeling a little bit kind of like enmeshed a little bit, or they're kind of then going to feel like, oh, attachment's unsafe because then I feel like I lose myself, right? Like I don't get to keep my authenticity and autonomy. So that feels challenged. So they might go more avoidant. And then if there's, traumas and stuff like that, we might end up with the disorganized, which is kind of like a combination, sometimes known as fearful avoidant. Yeah. So, so that's that.
So I just went a bit of a tangent on there because, again, obviously we spoke about it a little bit before, but obviously that was key parts what we were talking about there. So again, that's what we're talking about with, again, people falling in lust. You kind of mentioned about sort of knowing yourself. So Karen, going down that path again. So massive tangent there. That was in my head I thought. So I know some people will listen to that and be like, what's an avoidant attachment style? And I know it's really, really important. So again, we talk about like when we go on dates with people and we have that falling in lust, knowing the difference between chemistry and connection, and then how you kind of navigate that period where basically people are pretending. And you were just basically talking about knowing yourself.
Yeah, right. So, but just in that, and again, that's just like the briefest little basic oversight. So definitely, if you don't know much about it and you're struggling with patterns in relationships, highly recommend finding out a little bit more about that. But again, that's pointing to, we're all going to have our own unique set of little triggers, right? Or little unresolved things from the past. So then when we get into relationships and we feel this insane chemistry, often what's happening is, we're meeting someone that's going to trigger those same familiar feelings. But if those familiar feelings were not like security and emotional safety and, freedom and a good playing field to be expressive and be myself, then we're falling into problems, right? Because what we're actually getting is someone who feels a little bit out of reach, which feels familiar, and it triggers that kind of reward, right? So again, with the chemistry stuff, often what is happening as well is this little bit of like intermittent reward. So just like any addiction, we're getting that like intermittent dopamine hit, which keeps us going back for more, and then feeling a bit anxious when it's not there. So then when it comes back, it feels amazing, only to get like the low crashes again. So again, being aware of these things, and again, often pain will make us aware, right? So when the relationship doesn't work out, even though it was like, oh, but this was like soulmate level, chemistry and attraction, what could possibly have gone wrong? And again, in those situations is when we're going to start to see some of that stuff bubbling up, right? So it might be like this narrative that you tell yourself of like, oh, I'm not good enough, like no one's ever going to love me, or, whatever's coming up to the surface. I'm using those ones because, again, with clients often come to me are more predominantly on the anxious side of the scale. So that comes up, are common ones. And also like that feeling of discomfort, like if I put a boundary in place, I'm going to lose this connection. So therefore and then we disconnect from ourselves, we cause stress, inflammation, like all of this stuff.
The nice little cascade that kind of bubbles along. I think it's such interesting because when I heard that falling in lust, when one of my clients mentioned it to me, it literally hit me like a frying pan in the face. I was like, that is what I used to do. I used to go on these dates. And I said to my mates, oh my God, like I found the one, like she's perfect. And then like 2 or 3 months later, they're like, what happened? I went, oh, it didn't really work out. And once again, it's because I would kind of be comfortable in that crazy kind of energy. And again, I didn't realize that I was trying to always be the fixer. So we're going on dates and people kind of be dropping little things about how their life is a bit chaotic. And in my head, subconsciously, I'd be like, oh, brilliant, I can help them. So then straight away, I was getting this feeling confused and thinking it was something deeper than it was, but it wasn't. It's because I was kind of gravitating towards this safe energy, but actually it's not a safe energy for me in relationships. And I didn't realize this, which is why I kept attracting the same kind of person, bringing the same kind of problems. And I think that's the thing that people don't want to admit, is that a lot of the times if you're attracting the same kind of person, you are the problem, you are the common denominator. And it's kind of taking that responsibility and accepting, I'm the common denominator here. Like I'm attracting these kind of people, and I clearly am either reaching out to them on dating apps or seeing them out at a club or a bar or for coffee, and I'm drawn to them,
Yeah.
or I just happen to keep going for the same kind of person because that energy feels the same. So is that also something you kind of notice where you have to kind of speak to clients about taking that responsibility? Because there'll be people listening to this that's just hit a bit of a nerve, and they're like, no, they're the problem. They have problems, but you're the one that keeps bringing them into your life.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I had a similar like aha moment years ago when it was like, hang on a minute. Like I'd been on a date with a, lovely guy, like secure, planned, like thoughtful, planned nice dates. And at the end of the day, I think it was like date 2 or 3, all I was thinking about was this like avoidant, fuck boy that couldn't give me what I wanted. Do you know what I mean? Like wasn't in a place for a healthy relationship.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, hang on a minute, like I'm actively choosing idiots, right? Like there's someone secure and available in front of me right now, and I'm like not interested. And if you put the two side by side, like it was a no-brainer which one was a better fit for me. And in that moment, I had to come to the realization, like I'm saying I want a relationship with this, like a healthy, secure relationship, but actually I'm not available for that myself, right? Because this secure person is kind of like highlighting all the things in me that are, not in alignment with that outcome. So you said like, you've had that moment where you're like, oh, I'm the problem. And I wouldn't say like necessarily, it's more like, like there's a problematic pattern, right? Or a problematic belief or a problematic, something that is drawing you into playing that role, right? Because you even labeled it, right? Like the fixer role. Yep. And it's like, okay, at some point in your life, like that became, a skill that you adapted, right? And it became, again, maybe it's along the lines of, for some people, what role did you have to play to get your needs met or to receive love? And we're not necessarily conscious of that in that moment. We're just like, oh, I find this person interesting and there's chemistry. But underneath, like there's a whole bunch of things at play. So the more we can bring awareness to that and start to unpick some of that and heal some of those things, it frees us up then to choose differently.
Because that's a real common thing. I'm really glad that you sort of shared your story there, because that's also a common thing that I get with clients. And again, I'm not a relationship expert. That's not my thing with clients. But obviously when you're working, trying to get people from a place of being stuck to unstuck, if they're single, that's going to come up. And a lot of stuff I work on is kind of like what you mentioned, looking at patterns, because again, we're pattern creatures essentially. One of the biggest things is that they meet a nice guy and they'll say, what's wrong with me? I know he's a nice guy, but I'm fine. I can't, I don't want to be with him. He's boring. And I'm like, well, how do you know he's boring? It's like, oh, I could just tell. And again, it's almost like they are creating this story and this narrative to justify why they can't feel safe around this nice guy. So for people listening to this, they're like, oh my God, that's me. What advice would you give them if they are meeting nice guys or nice women, because it works both ways, but they can't seem to be comfortable in accepting that they are nice people, and they're naturally drawn to that natural like uncertainty? Exactly. So what advice would you give to people that are always stuck in that pattern? Obviously you mentioned a few things about you've got to do work on yourself, but kind of what does that kind of look like and entail?
Yeah. So I mean, again, there's no one size fits all, right? So in some of those cases, you're just physically not going to be attracted to someone, right? Like, and it's...
Can we just talk about that, by the way? That's okay. That is okay, isn't it? Like, it's okay because people are like, oh, I feel bad. If you're not physically attracted to somebody, because you're not physically attracted to them. Cool, I'm glad you said that. Thank you.
Yeah, so that's one thing, right? But if you're like, well, on paper, I should be attracted to this person, or like, when I first met them, there's enough there to make me go for a second date. So then we start to look at, okay, and again, attraction's not just physical, right? Like it's the energy someone's bringing, it's the, the connection that you have, how secure you feel with someone. So I think part of this is starting to reshuffle priorities. So when we talk about emotional unavailability or like the chaos demons, it's like what we're essentially saying is emotionally unsafe, right? So if you want a happy relationship, you want a healthy father for your future kids, or mother for your future kids, emotional safety should be a priority for you, right? So if you're seeing someone that's just like, they're chaotic, and again, we're all works in progress, right? So like me, self-confessed idiot lover back in the day, you self-confessed reformed fuckboy, so we're living proof that you can do work and evolve past patterns, right, and choose differently and have healthy relationships. So with that, it's just redefining your priorities and going, okay, also we want to be looking at values. Does this person's values align with mine? And then, like, again, give it time, right? Because often in the early stages of dating, we're not our most authentic selves, right? Like, we've kind of got this little bit of a projection going on because we're like showing up as the best self. And again, that links into that chemistry, right? Because often what we'll do is project onto someone. So we know a little bit and then we fill in the gaps. And often,
Yeah.
like, dating potential is a thing as well. So it's starting to become
Oh,
aware
I
of
love that. Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
becoming aware of those things. Because again, like with the example that I gave, I've got a real life person in front of me that's showing up, wanting to get to know me, take me on dates. And then I've got someone who is doing the opposite, but I'm projecting potential over there and going like, but if they did suddenly turn around and, they're more exciting and blah, blah, blah. So, but that's not the reality of the situation, right? Like, one is reality, one is fantasy. So becoming more honest with ourselves. And again, I think as we get older and we realize, okay, we don't have forever to figure this out, like, we do start to naturally make different choices. Getting to know yourself. And then also, I have a friend who was dating a great guy, secure, and she was having a great time with him. She liked him, but she was like, it's just a bit like, not boring per se, but like, I kind of want somebody who's got some passion about something.
Mm-hmm.
So she had a conversation with him about it. And he was like, oh, actually, I'm really passionate about this thing. But my ex-wife used to hate me talking about it. So I just, I haven't really brought it up because I didn't want to, like, put you off. And she was like, no, like, that's exactly what I want to see more of. Like, tell me more. And so, they shared that, and they do that now. Like, he makes a great living and has won loads of awards doing this photography, which is what it was. And they're, happily married for 10 plus years. So sometimes having those conversations can just deepen that connection.
Absolutely. And I think that's as well. It's wanting to have those conversations. So I think a lot of time people don't want to have that conversation because they don't necessarily want to be vulnerable themselves. Because, like, if you want the other person to share, then it means that you've got to share. And I feel like that's a big thing where, again, people don't like to be vulnerable. So you kind of got like two camps of people. You've got the people that are super vulnerable on the first date and will be like, here's my life, and then wonder why they scare people off. Or we've got the people that are never vulnerable and then wonder why relationships never work out. I was literally talking to somebody yesterday about this. I was working with them through some stuff. I can't remember the questions I asked. And it was about defense mechanisms. And I basically said that how you show up with guys is your defense mechanism, because you never allow them to see the real version of you. So when they leave you, you can just say, well, they never really knew me anyway. I'm like, but you're never going to get that real connection with them unless you actually lower your defenses and be a little bit vulnerable. And we kind of said this last time, where there's got to be layers and levels to it, where basically the more you know someone, the more you kind of divulge. And it's like kind of what we mentioned here about like dating potential and giving it time. Because for me, dating is information gathering. It's not you go out with someone, I love you, let's get married. It's, oh, that first date went well. I learned a bit more about them. Second date, you learn a bit more about them. And it's that there's a process to it that I feel like nowadays with this Tinder culture and the microwave culture, people want things instantly. And they think after 2 or 3 dates, they're going to know everything about them. They're going to be magically, passionately in love with them, want to rip their clothes off. And like, it's just not the case. And it's like such unrealistic expectations. I know I've gone on a massive tangent there about loads of points, but I feel like it's such a big thing where that vulnerability piece and that time piece, people don't really understand how important they both are.
Absolutely. And I'm the same. Like, I used to be like, I meet someone and be like, oh my God, it's the one, I found the one. And then like the ones that I thought So yeah. And again, what we're doing then is really setting ourselves up for danger, right? Because we're making assumptions about someone that are not backed up by anything whatsoever apart from our, wild imagination. And we're shortcutting the process of getting to know someone, right? So what you were saying there is what I advise clients all the time. It's like pacing. So you meet someone, had a great time, felt, attraction, great. Let's see how they show up next time. And again, we're not even doing like a few dates here, right? It's like, let's see how they show up over 3-4 months. Are they the same person? Are they showing up consistently? Or after month 2, does the mask start to slip a bit and they can't keep up, that level of connection or whatever it is that, was going well in the first place. And we don't want to like shortcut that and let that person like real in close to us, bypassing all of our boundaries into our inner circle before we really know them and can trust them, right? Because it's like to earn that trust. And in terms of the vulnerability, like it's uncomfortable, right? Like being vulnerable with someone, like having those uncomfortable conversations. And again, I think, especially if people are more leaning on the anxious attachment side of the scale, you know, we can make a big deal in our head, right? Of like, we tell ourselves this story of like, oh, if I say this, this will happen. And it's like often when we actually have that conversation, what we find is it brings us closer together, right? Like, but if there's that fear, again, based on past experiences or upbringing, where if I say something or I express a need or ask for clarity, the other person's going to fly off the handle and there's going to cause this disconnect or whatever, we kind of train ourselves out of doing those things or out of having those conversations with ease. And again, when it comes to secure attachment and healthy relationship and secure, you know, emotional safety, it's in those conversations, right, that is built, that is cultivated.
I also think as well that I always said, if you can't have this kind of conversations with someone, should you be in a relationship with them? And that for me, and again, I was going to come on to red flags because we kind of touched on it a little bit last time. But again, that for me is a big red flag that you are nervous. And again, I understand it can be past things, so it's not necessarily about that other person. I'm very well aware of that. It could be an internal thing with us. But you should be able to have that conversation without fear of that person's going to fly off the handle, they're going to shut me down, they're not going to listen to me, they're going to invalidate my feelings. If that is what you're getting from kind of stuff they've done in the past with you, that for me is a bit of a telltale sign that you're probably not in the right relationship with them.
Yeah, and just to go a little bit deeper on that, because like that's on the surface, like everyone's like, yeah, of course, like everyone agrees with that, and they're like, yeah, makes complete sense. But then in reality, if someone's in that situation, and this is where those disconnects are, right, where it's the difference between awareness or knowledge and embodiment and integration, is like in that moment, then what is stopping you? So you know that, and you would tell a friend that. But what is in that moment, you can't do that, right? You can't walk away because you think, well, this is the best person that I've ever found. You know, I do want a family, like, so I need to make this work. Or maybe you've even got a family with that person, right? And you just, it's coming up against like, oh, this person actually is not safe. Or like, I can't have a conversation without them, you know, leaving for 3 days, right? And then coming back. And it's like, okay, so we know that's not healthy. We know that's not the reality that you want to experience. So what are we going to do about it, right? Like what's keeping you in that situation, or what's, you know, making you downplay your own needs, or, you know, not having those conversations that on some level you need to have. And that's where the real work and embodiment comes in, right? And that integration, because it is us connecting in with those different parts of ourselves and relearning. Because even with the clients that I work with, right, we go through all these processes and then they meet someone, and sometimes there'll still be a little bit of hesitancy, right? Because they're like, even though I know this person is great and they've given me no red flags, not like the past relationships used to, but I still find myself hesitating to bring something to the table or to bring up a conversation. And then when I do, automatically it's like that new belief is reconditioned, right? Like, no, it is safe for me to express myself. It is safe here. So it is this balance and this work that's ongoing. But yeah, it's just like lifting up the lid a bit on that topic, because there's more at play, right, than just what we know logically.
Oh, absolutely. And like I said, I think with lots of stuff we talk about here, it's like obviously we've got an hour to talk with each other. Like the stuff that we talk about, we just had a conversation before we started, and we basically we could have a whole hour conversation about that one topic. So again, listeners listen to this. Like the whole point of the reason why I have amazing guests on like Laura is that I'm basically getting you to think, oh, that's interesting, I need to find out more. And again, it's not like deliberately pushing you down a path of like working with Laura, but it's like do your own research yourself, because me and Laura are both in the same field of we want people to like figure this stuff out themselves. So if anything we're saying, like that's a massive topic, and I'm really glad you kind of took it to that sort of next level down. And I think one of the biggest things with this is about that's sort of like that taking that step back is realizing that people are taking time from dating to work on themselves, to figure this all out. That's all well and good, but that's just practice. And it's really easy to be quote unquote fixed and healed when you're not triggered by anything and anybody. And so realizing you're then going to go into the dating world again at some point or have interactions with people. And it's then how you navigate the test days, those test moments where you thought, quote unquote, you were healed, quote unquote, you were past it, but then you do get triggered again. And then people catastrophize it and like, oh, I'm broken again, I haven't fixed it. And it's like, no. What have we learned from this experience? And I think that's the thing, people can be, like I said, I use the word fixed and healed, but that's the terminology that people often use. But it's like, you have to actually put it into practice. Because it's only when you go into these experiences and situations that test you, that you can still see, yes, I've improved here, but I've still got a lot to work on here. Is that also something you kind of work on clients with, of like, hey, this is still a continuous journey?
Yeah, I was listening to your episode and you were talking about your dog, right? And you had two paths to go down to the test, right? So yeah, it's like that. Like when I think we've all been there at some point where we're like, oh, I'm healed. I'm like,
I've sorted it. I've cracked life.
Life will never be a problem again. And then you run into, another problem. So again, there's a word capacity, right? So we are always expanding our capacity, right? So in terms of going from anxious or avoidant to secure, what we're doing there is increasing our capacity for, intimacy or vulnerability or emotional discomfort, emotional dysregulation while we come back to it, to that regulated place. So again, we can do so much on our own, but then when we run into a problem, rather than like spiraling out over whatever's, coming up, we can just go, okay, here's an opportunity for me to reveal another layer of like, maybe there's something else that's coming up that I've not looked at yet, which is coming up in this specific situation. Maybe this is just revealing, okay, yeah, this is an opportunity for me to choose different, right? In the past, I would have stayed in this situation. I'm actually going to leave it, or I'm actually going to have a conversation that I previously wouldn't have. So it's kind of like training, right? Like we get to exercise what we know and put it to the test. And while we're doing that, it's not a wasted experience, right? It's like us training, increasing our capacity, and learning more about ourselves.
I think it's such a key thing. It's like none of these things where things go wrong, it's not wasted. It's like the whole thing is like it's still a learning experience. And it's like, yes, it may not have gone how you wanted it to go, but actually there's valuable lessons that you can learn from that. And there's a formula I teach my clients, and it's pain plus reflection equals progress. So I think when things go wrong, a lot of the time we sit in that pain and we just go over it and over it and over it. As soon as we possibly can, it's like, right, can I reflect? What have I learned from this? What can I take from this? What can I do to make sure this doesn't happen again? And that's then we get that deep layer of progress, which is ultimately what we want. Next time, this is how I'm going to handle that situation. And we've kind of touched on something here about this emotional availability. And I feel like that term has kind of come on the rise a bit. I think the right TikTok and all that sort of stuff, like I'm looking for a guy that's emotionally available. It's come a lot more mainstream. Do you think that more people are more aware of their emotional patterns now? Or do you think people are just creating new ways to avoid accountability? Because I feel this is a big topic.
Yeah, well, I had my suspicions, and so I put a poll on my Instagram stories, and I was like, right, how you phrase the question to me, like with the rise of the terminology and it becoming more mainstream, what's the impact, right? Like, are people more aware? Are there more interesting, authentic conversations happening, or has that knowledge and awareness increased and zero things have changed? And the votes, like the majority were like, yeah, like people are aware of it, but nothing's changing. And I think people's experiences are they're even seeing it on like people's profiles where someone's like, I'm looking for someone who's got emotional maturity, or, I'm looking for someone who's this thing. And then they start dating this person, assuming, right, that this person must be emotionally available themselves or must have.
They wrote it in their bio. They must be.
It's not a wild jump to assume that, like if it's there in black and white, but that's not the case, right? So again, it's like, okay, they might be emotionally available, but like for 3 days only, or like until you start developing feelings, and then they freak out and realize, oh, actually, no, I can't cope with this. So yeah, that's kind of been the word on the street.
That's really interesting. Because for me, I feel like when it comes to emotional availability, people people don't come to me for dating stuff. So we're talking to a very similar age group of people,
I think but
the different needs when they come to us. Yeah. But this emotional availability, I'll be laughing and people say, "Oh, I'm looking for somebody that's emotionally available," and I'm like, "Hun, you are not emotionally available yourself. Like you're wanting this person," and I'll say, if you had Mr. or Mrs. Dreamboat that was emotionally available right in front of you, you would not have a clue how to deal with that because you don't know how to manage your emotions and have that availability yourself. So I think also people get ahead of themselves with this and they're like, oh, I want emotional availability. When it's like, hun, you're not that yourself. And it's like, but it's like that buzzword of, oh, the opposite sex or the same sex, whatever your preference is, likes that. They love the fact that people are emotionally available. So I'm just going to throw that in there because I've read a book. So I've now got it nailed down.
Or again, that false thing, right? Of like, well, I know about this thing logically and intellectually, so therefore it must be embodied. And
Yep.
as we know, that's not the case. And I'm going to risk taking us down on a little tangent here
Oh,
to
let's go.
just
I love tangents. Let's go. I'm ready.
iterate on.
I'm sitting comfortably.
So, because I see this a lot with clients, right? So, how I explain it, because sometimes they'll be like, oh, they'll finally meet someone and go, oh, I wish I'd met this person years ago. And I'll be like, yeah, but you wouldn't have, right? Because even if you had,
Yes.
like, you just wouldn't have given them the time of day probably, or, you would have just passed. So, how I describe it is like those emotionally available people, those dream relationships, aligned partnerships are available right now, but not on your level. So, we've both talked about like reticular activating system, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we could explain it on that level, as in like there's just something around you that's just like deleting and distorting those things, so they're not actually coming into your awareness. Or if we go on the more energetic level, then it's like you're on a different level, right? Like you're not kind of on that same frequency as the thing that you desire, so therefore like you can't see it, it can't come in. But and again, like if we look at it as manifestation is often like us pushed out, right? Like what's going on
Mm-hmm.
internally getting mirrored back in reality, and then when we shift something internally, that shifts what shows up externally. So the more we kind of look into how those mechanics work, it gives us more clues as to why you might not have yet found someone who is on that level that you want to be on, because you're attracted but not on the level that you want to.
Absolutely. And it's just something I say to people, life happens for you, not to you. But it first has to happen to you in order for it to happen for you. So what I mean by that is you haven't learned the lessons yet that will allow you to do the work on yourself. That means that you can attract and keep the person you want to have. So the formula I use on this, I did a whole workshop on this, which is again available. People have previously seen it. It's a live workshop I did at the University of Lancaster. It's a formula about lasting change. And the formula is B times do equals have. So people want to have this relationship. But in order to have this certain relationship, you have to do certain things. In order to do certain things consistently, you have to be the person that does those things naturally. So people try and do extra things, like they'll try and, I don't know, whatever it is, like they'll be kinder, try and do some emotional stuff. But that doing won't give you the lasting relationship you want to have. You've got to go on the deep level, which is what we're talking about, the knowing doing gap. They know they want to do better, but subconsciously the programs aren't wired that way. So you have to become the person that can actually attract the relationship you want to have. Because as I mentioned a minute ago, if you had the thing you wanted to have right now, but you haven't done the work on yourself, you will ruin that because you haven't become the person that can do the thing to maintain that relationship. So there's a process, kind of with the whole thing we spoke about for this entire episode is there's a process to it and you can't rush it. And as you mentioned, that person's out there and it's almost like you meet, it's like, God, you've been in my whole city the whole time. How have I not seen you? Well, you've walked past that person in your little pit of misery the entire time. You haven't gone to that coffee shop. You haven't read the books. You haven't gone to these classes or whatever it is to meet the kind of people out there because you've been working on yourself because you needed to do that to break the patterns, to be the person that can do the thing to have that result, if that makes sense.
Yes. And there's lots of little tangents I can go off from what you've just said there. But one I'm going to pick up on, because I think there might be quite a few people that resonate with this, is the ones that have done the work that have still not found the person. Ooh. So this comes up a little bit. So, and again, when this happens, because we know, right, like when we have done the work, like we've got to know ourselves better. So, and we have awareness, right? We have awareness of the energetics of things, and we're showing up, we're doing what we need to do. But for some reason, it's not fallen into place yet. So when that happens, if we're being honest, right, and if we're like, no, I genuinely am showing up every day, first thing I always point to is, and I always say, right, okay, if we were to give a percentage of how often are we thinking from that state of like what you just said, like, right, like be do have, like how often are we in that energy? Are we showing up, doing, and in our mind as well, right? Because again, we could be doing the things, but if in our mind we've got this like really negative narrative about ourselves, or like this, really vicious inner critic that's like self-sabotaging our every move and bringing us down, that is just because no one else can hear it doesn't mean that it doesn't have an effect. Like it's still very real and it's still having effects. So when I say, right, give a percentage, how much have you been in the energy of like being in that state of, aligned with what it is that you desire versus speaking against it, thinking against it? And it's always like, there's never been a situation where the person hasn't got what they want and they've said, no, I'm like 100% over here on this side, right? Like, and it doesn't need to be 100%. Sometimes it can just be, like 55% on the side of what you want and that energy that then makes things happen. So that's always the first place to come back to, of like when we're doing that kind of honest self-inquiry of like, how, religiously am I sticking to this? And the other thing is like, okay, is there any hidden beliefs still at play, right? Am I like saying I want to find a partner, but then I'm going on these like TikTok spirals of like all men are idiots and all this stuff, right? And walking around in the street like side-eyeing any man, right? Like wet lettuce. So we've got to be mindful of that as well. So those two things. And I think, to your point, just to branch out into some different topics of like, it's like if you woke up in your dream body today, but you've not developed the discipline with the diet and the workout, are you going to maintain that body? Or are you going to slowly go back to where you were? Like there's always the example with the lottery winners, right? Like they win the lottery, but because they've not developed that millionaire mindset or like, the knowledge of what to do with that money or the whatever you need to be able to hold on to that and invest it properly, then again, within a set amount of years, they've not only like lost the money, but like even when they manage to keep some of it, their happiness level goes back to before they got the money. So I find that quite fascinating as well.
Exactly that. It's like they haven't developed all the stuff that goes along with it. And I think there's really something interesting you mentioned there as well about the people when it comes to like doing affirmations or meditating and stuff like that. It's like if you're just doing that for 5 minutes of the day, well, what about the other 23 hours and 50 minutes of the like? You can't just do it for a sporadic amount of time. And again, you're not going to be perfect all the time because nobody is. But the whole thing to ask yourself is like, are you as much as possible doing this stuff to get yourself onto a level that, again, you can see these things, attract these things, etc., etc., etc. And you've got to be honest with yourself first of all. And then the second thing is, as well, you kind of mentioned about this whole side-eyeing thing. It's also, what are your views on people in relationships? So it's like, if you see someone's in a relationship and you're like, oh, straight away, what you're saying to the universe, energy you're putting out there is, I don't want that. Rather than actually being happy for people and assuming, oh God, I'm really glad, really happy for them. It's like people when they see them in fancy cars and like, oh, I bet they stole that money, or I bet they It's like, well, no, just be happy for them. Oh God, they must have worked really hard for that. Just changing the narrative we have around that thing that we ultimately want, because again, that just then changes how we see it, and also then the beliefs that we have around it.
Absolutely. That's a really good point, because it brings us back to like the hidden awareness, right? Like, we think we're doing the thing, but those will be our little tells of like, oh, actually, like if I was in my dream relationship or, whatever it is that you want, what would my reaction be to that thing? Yeah. Like, and 9 times out of 10, it's going to be a different thing. Like you said, you'd be like, oh, great, I'm glad they found their person too.
Exactly. And it's like straight away, it just changes the whole energy around it. And again, makes you walk around in a nicer state. To be around with this bitter person that's like, oh, I want a relationship, but all relationships suck. It's like, okay, well, which one is it? So final thing is, we've covered so much stuff, by the way, and once again, this is exceeding my expectation. Like, again, we had a great conversation last time, and this one is just added to it. I can't remember if we spoke about this before or not, but deal breakers. The concept of deal breakers, do you think that it's changed in recent years? And are people becoming more rigid or more flexible into what they'll accept? We kind of touched on it a little bit earlier on when we were talking about people nowadays basically saying like they're not going to waste their time. Yeah. But are people kind of going in with these deal breakers and being like, well, if the one thing that's not there, I'm letting them go? Or are they being a little bit more flexible with it?
Well, Danielle, it depends if they've got an avoidant attachment style or not. So again, I think I did a poll, and the general thing was, like most have become more rigid because, again, it's protecting energy. They know themselves better, so they're like, I know that's not going to work with this person. I know and again, in the past where we might have had that leniency and a bit of time to play with and be like, well, let's just see how it goes, they're more likely to call it quicker because they're like, I'm not sticking around to find out. So in that regard, so deal breakers would be more, in alignment with values, right? It will be like, in terms of the things that matter will be the big deal breakers, and not just like, oh, he wore the wrong shoes to a date, right? Like, whereas that might have been a deal breaker in your 20s, like now in your 30s and 40s, that's not so much the case. However, there will be times where people, and again, often with, say, people that have more avoidant leaning tendencies, will tend to pick up on, something silly that's not an actual deal breaker, that could be something that could have a conversation around and be worked through. So, for example, that example I gave with my friend who was like, oh, he's not got anything that he's really passionate about, right? Like that could have just been a straight up deal breaker, but no, they had a conversation and it turned out it wasn't a deal breaker at all. So whereas there's plenty of examples of this, like some people go, oh, like this person wears jogging bottoms in the house, right? So I'm not gonna, that's a deal breaker, right? I couldn't possibly, or whatever.
I've gone.
And that often comes up when someone's got more avoidant leaning tendencies. There's a podcast called Ken Reads that I've been on a few times, and we like unpack these experiences in terms of that people have had. And that jogging bottoms one is like directly from an actual real life example that someone gave of, they were like, yeah, the reason he gave was like, yeah, you wear jogging bottoms, so it's a no.
That is bizarre. Like,
right.
Yeah, because I mean, like I said, each to their own. It's always makes me laugh whenever I walk the dog. It's like the stuff that people will see me walking around in, especially when it's winter and it's dark. And I'm thinking, people can be looking at me thinking, God, what does this guy do for a living? Like the stuff I see him wearing and rocking around him. It's like, and it always makes me laugh when I tell people what I do. They're like, oh, it's like, yeah, I don't walk around this all the time. Like I'm just shoving stuff on because it's cold. I want to be comfortable.
Yeah, but like what we're wearing these days is the least of our worries, right? Like, so yeah. Get your priorities.
But isn't that the thing though? It's like people in the past, I feel, were more bothered about the external, like, oh, what clothes they're wearing, what brand they're wearing. Yeah. Whereas I do feel like there has been a shift, especially in the last couple of years, where people are more bothered now about, well, actually, what kind of person are they? So all the stuff I kind of spoke about, I do feel like there has been a shift in that, and we're not as shallow as we used to be.
Yes, thank goodness.
I know. Final thing, because you did put some stuff out with your audience. Is there anything else you wanted to touch on quickly that your audience sort of mentioned? Because again, I know we could go off on massive tangents. I wasn't sure if there's a specific theme that had popped up with your audience still.
Yeah, so there was a few. So, for example, there's a great question that was worded. How do you discern between people who know the lingo versus the people that live it?
Ooh. Do you want to talk about that then? Because that's really interesting. Yeah, I like that. I love that.
Great question, right? So again, pacing comes into this, right? And just that little bit of your own discernment, right? In terms of just because someone has presented a certain way and says, talk's a good game, is it sustainable, right? Because anyone can do that for 3 weeks or even 3 months. Is it sustainable? And you will get clues and cues. So for example, a great one here relates to the questions that we talked about already in terms of if someone's presenting as emotionally secure and safe and available, if there's then something that you need to address with that person, like a slightly uncomfortable topic or, something along those lines, a boundary that you might need to set, how do they respond? Because that's going to tell you everything you need to know, right? Like if they respond in a safe way that makes you feel good, then that's a green light. If they I'm trying to think of the right word. If they get defensive, right? So that's going to be a tell. Or if they don't respect your boundaries, right? If they don't take no for an answer. I just wanted to mention this book as well because I think it's really interesting. It's called The Gift of Fear. And I heard you talking about it in one of your previous episodes about intuition versus feelings, right? So this is super important and something I try and talk about as much as possible is tune it into your own intuition, right? Because we know, we have those little signals that signal to us like, oh, that's not safe or that doesn't feel good. So it's about listening and tuning into those and acting upon them versus hearing it and just downplaying it and be like, oh, well, gaslighting yourself. It's like, no, lean into that. And that's going to help you discern because we'll have cognitive dissonance, right? If someone's presenting as emotionally available, safe, well-versed on certain things, but the energy they're giving off feels unsafe, we need to listen to that, even if it doesn't make sense.
Something I would say is don't try and paint red flags white. And it's like there's so many times we do that. We know we get this massive jolt within us. We're like, they'll say something. It's not even a thing, but you pick up on it and you're like,
Yes.
And it's like, oh, just going to ignore that. And it's like, no, don't try. There's something there that is a bit of a warning. And like I said, I love the word you said that there about gaslighting yourself because nowadays there's a big thing on, oh, I've been gaslit and da-da-da. It's like, we do it to ourselves. So once again, we're focusing so much on this external thing that we can't control, when actually it's bringing it back internally and fixing that relationship with yourself so that when you do get that signal, you listen to it because you trust yourself, you trust your gut, you trust your intuition. And as we said before, that takes time because if you've basically gaslit yourself for years, or someone else has gaslit you, you've been in an abusive relationship, you may not have that ability to trust yourself straight away. But that, once again, is something you're aware of and is a work in progress, so that you can trust yourself, your gut, your instincts, while you're navigating this crazy dating world that we've discussed for the last hour.
Exactly, right? Like coming back, because again, that's the most valuable thing you have, right? Is your own internal compass, your own intuition. So, and again, we've been trained away from it in multiple different ways. So coming back to that is a skill.
So, final question, as I've just summarised all up. What advice would you give to some? And again, I know this is very nuanced. Everyone's different, but talking generally speaking here, what advice would you give to somebody that is feeling a bit stuck and a bit, disheartened by the dating scene right now?
Okay, if they're feeling stuck and disheartened, I always suggest taking a break, right? Because going out there, and I think probably everyone's been in this boat at some point, like going out there with that disheartened energy is not usually effective anyway, right? Like we just kind of give off this vibe. Anyone jaded.
Talk about energy we're giving off, and it's like, oh, hello.
So if you find yourself like feeling like that, then yeah, take a break, take a step back. And again, like the apps are there, but you don't have to use them, right? Or you can dip in and out. And I had a client once, and she's like, I use it like a little bit of a job. Like I check it on a Tuesday and a Thursday, and that's it. I check it to like set up a date, and then if they, that's it. She ended up meeting someone outside in the wild anyway, but she still was using it because it's a tool, it's something that's available. But check like what works for you. Is it like joining somewhere, like a new hobby? Is it going to the in-person dating events, or is it just like taking that time out until you feel like you've got clarity on who you are, the energy of what you want as well? And I always like recommend to clients like tuning into thinking about what is the relationship you want? Like what energy does that have? How does that feel? Because the more you can tune into how you want to feel in a relationship, again, that's going to be feedback for, does this person make me feel how I want to feel? Or do they make me feel like uncertain and unsafe and dysregulated? Because if it's any of those, it's a no, right? Like save yourself time and just come back to those things. Like, does it feel emotionally safe? Yes. Okay, proceed. And it might not work out, but it's definitely going to be more in alignment with the ones that make you feel dysregulated and crazy.
I love that. I've never really heard anyone speak about that before, about like the energy. Like I know it in terms of like setting goals in the life you want to have, but actually specifically in a relationship. But I think that's really, really valuable. So Laura, if someone wants to find out more information about you or is interested in working with you, where is the best place to get hold of you and contact you?
Best place to get hold of me is Instagram. I live on Instagram. So it's Quit Dating Idiots, little underscore between each word. So Quit Dating Idiots on Instagram, shoot me a message, or check out the website, which is quitdatingidiots.com.
And again, I put all the information down in the show notes so people can just click straight on that. But Laura, thank you very much for today. It's been absolutely awesome. And again, I really appreciate all the valuable insights that you've given my audience today. Pleasure as always. Thank you very much for having me on. That was awesome. Honestly, that was so good. I was going to press finish that. Honestly, I knew we would.